I think that creative people who put an idea out into the world are the most vulnerable people. And I think to your point, when it's about yourself and you're marketing yourself, trying to get that promotion or get that new job or make a name
Hmm.
for yourself in the industry, it's like doubly so. Like it is a very vulnerable position. And then I think in order to move past that, what we have to start thinking of through the lens of is we are not the result of our work. The work is a result of us.
In a world saturated with content where attention is the ultimate currency, how do you not just capture it, but sustain it? And for marketers, especially creatives, how do you apply your immense talent to consistently innovate, build, and even promote your own ventures in a way that truly break through the noise? Our guest today is a master at dissecting the science of attention and channeling creative energy into repeatable success. Ted Harrison is the founder and CEO of Neuemotion, a creative agency servicing Fortune 500 clients with neuroscience-driven video content. Ted's unique background, including building a 9-figure content business as an entrepreneur at Twitter, producing award-winning Super Bowl commercials, and even animation work in Iraq. He's also the author of Entrepreneurial Creativity, a book that offers practical guidance for anyone looking to create, build, innovate, and explore. In today's discussion, we'll dive into how Ted, as a creative who makes things for marketers, now markets his own agency. We'll explore his unique perspective on personal branding, the core tenets of entrepreneurial creativity, and how understanding the human brain can revolutionize marketing strategy. You're listening to Marketable Marketer, where we meet with the world's top marketers, founders, and freelancers who are using their hard-earned marketing skills to unlock new opportunities, create more value, and live more intentionally. And today we're discussing what it means to be a marketable founder. Ted, your career has been this really fascinating blend of production and tech and entrepreneurship. You've gone from doing animation in Iraq to leading production for Twitter, now X, and now you have your own creative agency, Neuemotion. And I'm curious, how did these diverse experiences shape your understanding of entrepreneurial creativity? And what was the moment that led you to write this book on repeatable creative success?
Yeah, there's lots of moments. And if you like look back, I think if anyone looks back on their career, you're building towards these moments that then all of a sudden everything kind of flips for you where you're like, oh, I understand this in a new light, or I feel like I have a better understanding of like my industry or what's going on. And it feels like a light bulb moment, but in reality, it's like the experience and the grind that then eventually gets you there. And I think for me, when it came to writing this book, the big like unlock moment for me was realizing that creativity is a lot more portable than we let it
Mhm.
be. There's a lot more opportunity for us to pick up things that we know in one area and move them elsewhere. And so one of the things that I go through in the book is I try to define creativity and art in general as very broad because I think it's applicable across a lot of places. And I think it's very easy to compartmentalize this creativity that we all have. Every human has it to a certain extent. And that's kind of like really the foundations of this book is like we should be able to pick up what we've experienced or done and then be able to apply it elsewhere. And frankly, I also just know for myself, like writing down how I actually approach things when I'm at my best, I'd be kidding myself to say that every single step that I outline in the book is followed to a T every single time because it's hard to do. But by outlining that, it's a good reminder for myself when even these days, like my team checks me on something and says like, whoa, we're skipping multiple steps here. Oh yeah, you're right. And it's a good moment of like accountability for myself and having written the book.
And one of the things that I found really helpful in the book is sort of the way that you even frame creativity as being as much about action in the process as it is about the ideas. I think, you know, a lot of people when they hear the word creativity, they think of like, oh, blue sky thinking and brainstorms and big ideas, but you talk as much, if not more, about, well, the process by which you bring about creativity, that is a creative act in and of itself. How do you think about the creative process as being separated from just creative ideas?
Yeah, I like to think about, and I do mention this, I think, in multiple points throughout the book, that you could apply the book to building your own process, right? You could apply these steps to like creating, like, what is my actual process? And I think what the crux of this really comes down to one of the questions that I think you should be asked after you've presented your work to the world, which is like, how did this come about? Like, how did you create this? And I think that a lot of times creatives want to be able to like have this like pie in the sky answer to your point, blue sky. Oh, it just came to me. Like as if somehow that's a
Mhm.
badge of honor that it just like
Yeah.
naturally occurred. But the truth is, when you look at every famous artist throughout history, the people that we see in the Met today or in the Louvre, they were like commissioned often for that work. They were getting paid to do this like type of creativity. Yes, they were inventing new formats and structures and ways to approach art. But for us, one of the things that's most is when someone asks me afterwards, how did you get to this idea? I think that's a really rewarding question because it
Hmm.
means that it meant something to them. And then I think we should be able to answer it as a creative, because if you're just like, I'm a genius, like that's not an answer and it doesn't help anyone. And it's also not the truth.
Yeah.
You could probably point it back to, even if you did come up with it out of nowhere, the reality is like your past experience, you leaned into multiple different things. But if you don't actually apply like a process to get there, you're just really hoping like when you're winning the lottery every time you go to create something.
Yeah, it's interesting that as you were talking about that, the metaphor that sort of popped into my head was like magic, where I think we as marketers and creatives want to be the magician, where people ask us how something is done, and we're like, no, no, no. Like that's the whole point is you don't know how it works, but it's like we're not here just to astound. We're here to like help other people have access to the same sort of insights and benefits and rewards. So we should be sharing our process. And also, spoiler alert, magicians have a process. They're
Yeah.
practicing all the time. Like they just make it look like magic. So I think that's a really important point in not just making it look effortless and helping other people on that same journey. And the book is does a great job of that. One other thing I wanted to chat about, just given it's such a important point in the book, is this idea of failure as not being necessarily the end. For this audience, marketers who are looking to market themselves, failure is, you know, obviously a big fear, but you say failure is the last cog in this machine of creativity. So what would be your advice or guidance to marketers who are hesitating because of the fear of failure?
I think you can just do a quick Google image search for failure, and it's going to be a bunch of cheesy looking graphics with quotes from very famous and successful people about failure. And failure is an inevitable part of life, and it's an inevitable part of the work that we do. And I think instead of the approach of being just afraid, this goes back to one of the other pieces that I mentioned, is that like the best creative is operating out of abundance, which means like the abundance of what's possible, what can be done here. When you start operating out of fear, which often is the fear of failure, you're limiting yourself before you've even begun the process.
Mm,
It's how you end up with like bland copywriting if it's in marketing, or you end up with a basic response to a brief because you're like, I'm trying to fit in this window and I don't want to get rejected. When the reality is, if you can operate out of like, what if we actually got to do this? That there's a lot
yeah.
more opportunity there. And then when you do fail, which you're going to, because sometimes those things just don't work, it's a data point, and I don't mean to make it too trivial by saying that, but it's another thing to learn from. And that's why the entire book is written as this loop, is because we
Hmm.
need to be like taking our outputs and then re-inputting them back into the same system and process so that we can be better moving forward. And frankly, I remember this. I don't know who said this, so I don't know who to credit this to, but I will go to like political campaigns, which is like a random thing to go to in today's climate in particular. But one thing I'll say is a lot of people, I heard this quote, and I think it was in relation to Nikki Haley, is she doesn't, at this point, she's lost in a couple different like processes in her bid to become a president, not even making it to the final stage. But she's still referred to as former presidential candidate Nikki Haley. Like there
Yeah.
is some truth to there is some pride in like taking a stab at something, even if it didn't work.
Yeah. 100%. Speaking of another famous creative, you talk about Tolkien a bit in the book. And I think when he comes up in the book, you're specifically talking about strategic guardrails and the fact that Tolkien, when he was writing the Lord of the Rings trilogy and The Hobbit, he actually created the map first. And I think, again, going back to maybe some of these misconceptions about creativity and specifically blue sky thinking, You're like, oh, I don't want to put any limitations on me. Everything should be on the table. I don't know what direction what form this is going to take. But you talk about how freeing it can be to kind of have that map of like, okay, this is the world of possibility I'm creating within. How do you see those strategic guardrails actually helping versus hindering creativity?
Yeah, it's funny at this point that my team has been joking about this quote from Tolkien that I say all the time and has ascribed it similarly to Michael Scott quoting Wayne Gretzky and then Scott. That is definitely something I use all the time. But I think it's really pertinent for us as creatives. It is when you think about every famous fantasy like author that we know, it's not just Tolkien. They would all tell you in one way, shape, or form that they had to kind of establish the rules of this fantastical world before they could really
Mm-hmm.
build the creativity out in it. Because then, if they don't, things break. And
Yeah.
I think that for us, that's the part that when we're going to make a campaign or build our own brand, if we have no guardrails or structures, don't know who we're talking to or what we're trying to achieve, we're really just playing with like fire, aimlessly walking through the world. We're not really actually thinking about what are we trying to achieve and how can we then get to the best result.
I think one of the things that also makes it difficult as someone who's trying to market themselves is, this is a skill set that marketers have, promotion, and it's really easy when you're talking about another product or service. If people say, "Oh my gosh, this is the worst breaded chicken ever," as a marketer, you're like, "I don't care. I wrote the headline. I think it's
I got you in
funny,"
the
and some
store. Yeah.
exactly, some people are going to love it. But then you put a slogan out there that's about TJ Blease, and people are like, that is the most obnoxious person I've ever met. And you're like, I will never do this again. This was a terrible mistake. But one of the things, again, you mentioned in the book is you say that our work is the result of us. We are not the result of our work. And I think that's a really helpful framing because as a marketer, putting yourself out there, it's like, if people don't like it, people don't like you.
Right.
And how how should a marketer who's looking to build more of a personal brand out there in the marketplace, how can this idea of there's the output and you are shaping it, the output's not shaping you, how can we think about that a little bit more thoughtfully?
Yeah, no, this is a really good. I think that you and I have had a number of discussions about this like throughout the years. For anyone listening, TJ hasn't made this clear already. We know each other well and have a long friendship. And we've talked about this at length. And I think first of all, I think that you have to recognize something that I truly believe. I think that creative people who put an idea out into the world are the most vulnerable people. And I think to your point, when it's about yourself and you're marketing yourself, trying to get that promotion or get that new job or make a name
Hmm.
for yourself in the industry, it's like doubly so. Like it is a very vulnerable position because you know all the people in your network that are going to be seeing whatever it is that you're going to do. And then start to internalize how they might respond because you know all these people. And I think the thing first and foremost that we have to understand is like recognize it is vulnerable. It is hard. It's not like an easy thing to
Yeah.
do. And then I think in order to move past that, what we have to start thinking of through the lens of is we are not the result of our work. The work is a result of us. And I think that the
Hmm.
more we can internalize that and understand, I have control here. Like I am the static factor, essentially. Like
Mm.
I'm bringing myself into this, and I'm going to like tweak off of that a little bit, flex more into this area of my personality in this particular instance, or in this area over here. And being okay with the fact that like some people like work TJ and don't like personal life TJ, or
Sure.
some people like, agency owner Ted and don't really love the fact that he talks about Baylor football too much. Like that, they're, that
Yeah.
like, I think that the more that we can start to separate out, like particularly in an instance where we're talking about ourselves, I personally do this because I obviously post a lot on LinkedIn in terms of just driving our own business. And I think that for me, I often have to separate out like this is a version of me, but it's not me.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
I have to kind of separate it out and treat myself. What would I tell someone else to be posting about in order to do what he's trying to accomplish? And be okay with the fact that just FYI, not everyone's going to like you. It just is the reality.
That's a really interesting sort of way of thinking about it because I think a lot of times you feel as if you're bringing your whole self, and that's sort of a misconception from the get. But then the other is that people are reacting to that full self, which like, no, it's this piece of you. And I think looking at your persona as that is a really helpful way to kind of have a slightly more nuanced and balanced relationship with social media and promotion, is that, oh, they're reacting to this aspect of me. I
Yeah.
haven't really thought of it that way.
And I could already hear people immediately being, that's not authentic. And we know that people want the authenticity. And to that, I would say, I don't think I'm ever posting anything that's inauthentic. I just think it's living typically in a corner of my brain that I'm uncomfortable with. Like we think about the number of people who are listening to this podcast right now, who are afraid to hit post or afraid to do some like a memo internally that helps establish them as a thought leader. That they've got really good insights, really good nuggets, really good approaches to things, and they're just never going to get heard because the one thing holding them back is, what is this one person going to think? And I think that it's okay to be pulling out of these recesses of our personality to then display them in order to be successful in what we're attempting to do. And I don't think that there's judgment may come, or but the truth is, like, the harshest critic is going to be yourself.
Yeah. And I also think authenticity is, there's a spectrum of how much you share and don't share. And I think on one end, you have sort of the stereotypical politician who's scripted, doesn't say anything off the cuff, is completely disingenuous. And then on the other hand, you have like Will Smith going on some podcasts. And you're like, I don't need to know. I don't need that. Too authentic.
I didn't need that information. Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
somewhere in the middle,
Yeah, we're somewhere between a confession or like a r/confession on subreddit to politicians. Somewhere between those is more than enough authenticity for me.
It's totally. So I'm curious how you, to the point of you posting on LinkedIn for your agency, how do you think about marketing yourself, Ted Harrison, versus marketing Neuemotion? Are those exact same thing to you? Are you building your own brand and credibility at the same time? Do you see that flywheel? Like, how do you differentiate between those two, or do you?
Yeah, it's a good question. Neuemotion is coming up on being 2 years old. And I think right now is the moment where that's beginning to separate and split. I think, first of all, I think anyone who's doing an early stage startup, small business, whatever it is, and you just got it launched, you should be using founder-led marketing, no question. So personal brand is very important. But we are getting to the point as an agency where we've actually are defining this at the moment internally about what is TED and what is Neuemotion. And I think that for me, one thing that has become clear, and you're getting like this is like sausage making in real time, because this is just where we're at the moment. But one of the big things that we'll be doing is separating out Neuemotion, because our clientele is premium clients. We work with B2B brands and do a lot of their social marketing and beyond. And Neuemotion will continue to be elevated in terms of looking like a premium agency and brand, which we are. Our talent backs that up and our results back that up.
Yeah.
So I don't think that we're just like putting on a facade there. While we split me off into a more relatable, yes, still premium, but still like able to chat about the things and accessible, because that's one of the big things that I like default to. It's we have an internal Stratafesto, and one of the first points in it is our default mode is help. And I think that for me, that's something I will be leaning into, because as a founder, is like, how can I be helpful, both publicly and even for our own teams consistently, while Neuemotion remains like a premium brand and a premium offering, and we start to kind of move more in that direction. But the thing is, for a while, to you asking the question, it's been one and the same, because the only way to steer business is to tap into the network that I have and the people that I know I can reach. And so I think it's really important for early on it to be okay, because a lot of people will get caught up in, I need eventually this to be different. It's like, well, you need the business to survive first if you're as a founder.
Totally. Yeah.
And so you got to take advantage of what you have. And most often the first advantage anyone has is their network.
And how's that contributed to your success, both just throughout your career, but then also with Neuemotion? Because I know that's some of the advice that you give to young people entering marketing and creative fields is to invest in your peers. I think when people are thinking about growth, they immediately think up. They think of mentors and managers and that kind of hierarchical relationship. Why is it so important, particularly when you're getting started, to look to your left and right?
Yeah, I think you and I on this podcast is a great example, first and foremost. Look at you
Touche.
as a marketer at TikTok, and yet we met in college, and here I am
Yeah.
running an agency. And what
Yeah.
people don't realize when they're young in their career is you can look to your right and that junior copywriter or assistant to the assistant art director that's around the corner from you. It's not going to be long. You're going to wake up one day and it's like they're the head of brand at a company you want to work for, or
Yeah.
they've gone off and left and made a connection elsewhere. And you just don't know how those things might boomerang back around. And yes, like you should be investing in those, like the vertical line up. I think that's a good visual for it of, yeah, you want to make sure you have the visibility because it's hard to grow if you don't have that. But at the same time, you shouldn't forget that just because your peer set doesn't have the power now, they're going to. And I think for me, one of the reasons, like I had the great fortune of working with this like army of great talent at Twitter and a lot of peers across the orgs. And because my position was fairly visible internally at the company. And then overnight, not this isn't going to happen to everybody, but overnight, Elon sent half of them everywhere. And
Yeah.
these are all like highly driven individuals. A lot of the decision making was nothing to do with whether they were good at performance. It's just about cutting costs for the company. And now they're everywhere else and making all these decisions. And the number, like the up level titles I see in my own network, even in just a couple of years post acquisition, is crazy. And again, not everyone's going to have Elon take over the company that they're at and fire half the people. But layoffs do occur. And just because someone got laid off doesn't mean they're not going to be important elsewhere, or that they find a role that's a better fit for them that then elevates them. And I think that the more you can invest outwardly, the more you will be seen and respected. And honestly, that gets you attention up the chain too.
Yeah. And I think and that's probably a better framing because to your point, you need that upward. But that's almost like short term, long term. And as with just about everything that we're talk about, it's a yes and.
Yeah.
Very rarely we're gonna be like, never do that, only do this. So I think that's a helpful way of looking at it.
TJ, I think I would turn this. I feel like this is something you're actually really good at. I think that you have done a really good job of investing, not just up, but out and seeing the potential of people. And I think I'm curious to get your perspective on this because I think that often people have this idea of, okay, there's like a person that does XYZ, but I always feel like, I don't know what your secret sauce is on this, but I feel like you are always looking at someone and like already see the full end, which is something I admire in people who can see, oh, this person did this thing, which means they could be doing this. Like you're already thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. And I'm curious what it is about you that like gets to that.
No, one, thank you. I think there's a few things. One, I think there's a general sort of lack of ego in the way that I approach my work. Like I really do just try to find the joy in doing the work in and of itself. And I don't care as much for the credit. And so that I think makes me someone that people want to collaborate with because they know that I'm just gonna be like, hey, we are all in this together. Like if you're my peer on legal or government relations or product or comms, and I'm the marketer who's sort of bringing this campaign to life, and yet everyone owns their piece, I'm going to share thinking, I'm going to share visibility, I'm going to share credit. So I think that sort of democratic position makes people feel like I'm not trying to withhold, because everyone's had those colleagues that you're like, hey, like, do you mind if you could share that deck? And they're like, oh, like I can't do that right now. It needs to be seen by this person, that person. And you're just like, what? Like, why are you being weird?
Yeah.
And so I think that probably goes a long way. And then the other is like a general empathy, which is probably, it's related to that lack of ego, but it's an empathy of like, I'm in the trenches here doing the work. I, want to be treated this way or seen in this light. And so I kind of look at the people on my level as like, you also have to deal with these chaotic reorgs or changes or, all of that. So I'm like, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
I know that I'm dealing with this. You're probably dealing with it too. So there's this kind of like camaraderie, especially working at very chaotic startups, which has sort of been my bread and butter, where I'm just like, if we're not going to show up for each other, in some ways, this company's not going to do it for us. So how can we make each other's lives easier? And having that sort of approach to colleagues over a decade, I've created a reputation as someone who's good to work with, has your back, wants you to succeed. And then as we all start to level up, it's like, oh, we are now the people who are making some of these decisions. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'd say those two principles factor in a lot.
No, I think that's like a really good takeaway to be focused on, hey, we are in this together. The output is the goal here. And I think that by approaching it that way, you're able to just see people for who they could become, which is, I think, very beneficial in networking laterally as opposed to vertically. That's an interesting takeaway.
Yeah, and there was some book I read years ago that kind of talked about like healthy debate and discussion versus unhealthy. And like healthy, you're discussing ideas, and like unhealthy, you're discussing people. And like I've just never been the type of person that's really gonna be like, oh, how can we get XYZ to do this better or that better? It's more
Yeah.
been like, hey, how can we make this concept? How can we land it? How can we execute better? What resources do we need to help this to fruition? So I think that's another thing, is focusing on the output and, from an entrepreneurial creativity perspective, the process.
Yeah. Bring that back around.
Boom! Nailed it. You talked a little bit about the sausage making of the branding and the differentiation of Neuemotion. And while I agree there is this sort of the category that you guys have positioned yourself is premium, but there's also, there's so many premium agencies
Yeah.
that I think another sort of positioning thing that I'd love to get your insight on is Neuemotion specializes in neuroscience-driven video content. I know from your days at Twitter that that was something that you really leaned into, was neuroscience and the psychology of attention. I don't know if we've actually discussed this. How did you sort of identify that as kind of this niche that you really created for yourself and then brought that onto Twitter, and now it's carried over to Neuemotion? How did you find that? And then how has that helped differentiate Neuemotion? And, there's a lot of agencies. So,
Yeah.
so how's that help you stand out?
No, it's a really good point. And thank you for reminding me that we do have a large competitor set, TJ. I got our work cut out for us. But no, so I think that the reality is like, there's a couple of things that were inflection points for how I stumbled into this. The first being as I was leading our production team, where we made ads on behalf of advertisers so that they would perform better, was like teaching best practices and like walking them through things. And often people would say like, this is all great, but what you're doing isn't in the same category as like what's happening on Meta or elsewhere. And so I was like, at a certain point, I can only look at the data that we have so much. I need to go look elsewhere. And the real light bulb moment for me was after doing like my 30th best practice session for, I don't remember what brand it was, and saying, you got to get attention. Everyone's been saying that in marketing for forever. You got to get, I finally was like, do I know what that is? I know what I know what the word means, but the real driving factor was I was like, I don't actually understand like what it is or what our brains do to decide to give it. And a lot of that is like really what led me down that path. And then we found a number of other things in terms of just how people like scan imagery and all that kind of stuff as a result of that. But like the first thing was just asking myself a question, which is a big thing I try to do all the time, is like ask a question about something that is either obvious or understood in general, but maybe needs a deeper dive. And I think that for me, that was the word attention. And so I went down a rabbit hole on MIT research papers, Harvard studies, did a lot of reading of abstracts to figure out, should I even read the rest of this? And then a lot of thesaurus up at the same time and dictionary to understand what was being written about.
And you did all this before AI.
Yes, I did. I did. It's much easier now. It's much easier now. Although I still worry sometimes about the hallucinations whenever I'm doing some research. So I have to double check. But yes, I was doing it before AI. And that was the big unlock for me, wasn't understanding attention. So I'll like describe this at a high level. There's obviously multiple layers to this. So by no means am I able to comprehensively go over this right now. But what was interesting to me is that it kept coming back to how we're built or how we're like wired. And that was like really fascinating to me, which made it more interesting to study and learn more. But attention, there's two critical factors at a very high level to start with. One is we want to understand the context of the world around us. I liken this to TJ, if you woke up this morning and didn't know where you were, you start to panic. It's like a very basic human instinct. I need the context for what's going on around me, because if I'm unaware, it's fight or flight mode, and that's not a good place to be in. And then the other factor being location, which just means the spacing of the world around us. There's also some of this that's actually quite layered in terms of the location of where things are stored in the brain and what you're activating, depending on like how you're approaching things. But for us, basically, you can break this down in like a filmmaker terminology. There's a reason that Steven Spielberg is considered one of the best, I would argue probably the best filmmaker of all time, although I'm sure you and I could probably have a very healthy debate on that on the side. But I would say one of the things that sets him apart is that he's actually, if you watch the films through this lens, you'll notice this. He is constantly setting up the context and putting things in interesting places on the screen. He knows where the audience is going to be looking and how they're following things. And so Steven Spielberg probably didn't do this research paper dive to understand what the brain is doing, but he intrinsically knew it, and it's come out in his films time and time again. You think of even like classic scenes of his from like Jaws or like Indiana Jones, and like the way that we're like looking at that idol, the same way that Harrison Ford is looking at the idol. Like it is all purpose built to get our attention, even though he's already got our attention because we're sitting to watch a movie, but like to a specific part of the screen, and we know why it's so important at all times. And so anyway, being able to, that's like getting really nerdy. To back it up to your question, it's really,
you shouldn't have brought up movies. This is going to derail the whole.
Yeah. But the thing that like, I think is that to really answer your question is like, by arriving at some of those conclusions, first of all, it's exciting and fun. And so it's like, it was implicit motivator to keep going further on this. And then second, I was reading all this stuff through the lens of like, how can I apply this to Twitter ads? And then further now at Neuemotion, it's like, how does this apply universally? And it turns out a lot of that research just continues to work in spades for us. Like our results when we work on like CTV ads versus everything else, like we continue to see the lifts that we're looking for because we're applying things that are just basic to how humans interpret content and imagery around them.
Man, I'm making so many connections. Again, damn you for bringing up filmmaking. But it's interesting because your background is in film. Like that was your major in college. And like, I think of you as being like this creative, but also you have this filmmaking background. I had a conversation on the podcast earlier with Will Cady, who somewhat similarly, he was the head of strategy at Reddit, and he was pitching brands on how to show up on Reddit authentically. But his background was in music. And a lot of what we talked about was his background in music and his ability to hop into a jam session like that, how that translated into being able to facilitate a brainstorm and knowing when to add to the music and when to let someone else have their solo. Like it really factors into his sort of process. How do you think your background and knowledge of filmmaking, which you just demonstrated, how does that influence you as a creative and as a founder?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think for me, first of all, there's definitely some like very clear ties because a lot of what we produce is video content that lives on platforms. But I think more than that, I think understanding just basic composition is helpful, but it's more so the storytelling aspect of what I learned. And not I know that as marketers, we love to call ourselves storytellers to the point where it's become a bit of a, okay, dude, or okay, girl, like chill. But I think that for me, I feel like how often I feel like I'm having to like back my way into explaining a 3-act structure or like how things work, even in like normal conversations with people who are aware of film, but it's like they've never taken the time to understand where the rising action is. And then all these different moments that can occur throughout the course of 3 acts. And for me, it's like an easy reference point for where we're at in a campaign or a specific piece of video. Everything can be broken down to a certain extent in these areas. Um,
hmm
and again, what I love about storytelling is that it's something we've been doing as humans since we could talk. And so the science in storytelling, we've been refining it for thousands of years. And so I'd say it influences me all the time. I also had the great fortune of working briefly with Jonathan Demme, who directed Silence of the Lambs, doing script coverage for him, which, by the way, I still do not understand why the film industry has 21-year-olds, 22-year-olds like reading scripts and then deciding if they should get passed on to Academy Award winning directors or not. But that's how that works, or it can work. But I'll never
I mean,
forget one of the
some
things.
of the movies I've seen recently, it seems as if it was the script was reviewed by a 21-year-old. So this is actually making a
Makes more
lot of
sense.
sense as you're
Yeah.
talking about it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but one of the things that I got to do with him once is he had been shooting, it was the time Occupy Wall Street was big. And so it's really starting to age me now. But he had been just going down to Occupy Wall Street and capturing footage, just like on a like digital camera. And for whatever reason, which is like I never got to do this. I got to go into a room with him and edit some of that footage, just like watching him.
Oh,
Someone
wow.
else was editing. He was there. I was over the shoulder, just like watching him make decisions. And
Wow.
when I say this footage was nothing spectacular, Jonathan Demme's a director, not a DP. And he was recording on like a camcorder, but it was just fascinating to watch him take in everything that was happening in his decision making on what should be included and like what he was piecing together. It was like, oh, this man is interesting. And not only was that man interesting, he remembered him when he showed up in another shot. And he's okay, we could tie these things together. And I think that like still to this day, that's one of those things. Is like, okay, now I understand why this guy won an Academy Award, and not only the Academy
Yeah.
Award, but every award that year in for the movie Silence of the Lambs. I still think about that in terms of, am I noticing enough? Am I seeing the full picture and how this all is brought to life?
And to your point on, sort of creative limitations, I think that's also like the power of the edit is really
Yeah,
where the thing is made. Like one of my favorite books on filmmaking is on the making of Mad Max Fury Road. And no one on that set had any confidence that that was going to be a good movie because there was no script. It was literally all storyboard. It was just images, images, images. And then the director's wife was the editor and she puts it all together. It follows the storyboard. And then everyone, when they saw it, I think it was Dennis, was like, I'm so sorry I doubted you. This is what you saw in your head,
yeah,
but there was no way we could have seen it. I love finding all of the different connections between different artistic disciplines because there's so much to pull from, and you give people a good reminder of mining that. I think
yeah,
so many people, they're influenced by their background and their interests and all these other things, but then they're just going about their day,
yeah,
just doing the next thing. But you are a really refreshing reminder on like, pause. Why are you doing this? Take a note, ask a new question, reflect on the
yeah,
process. And that is something that Will does a good job of as well. Also, a published author, which ways north. And so I think people like you, I like having in my life because I am someone who can just like, well, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to try that. And then you look back and you're like, well, what was your process? You're like, momentum.
yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, I think it's the most understated thing. And I think I jokingly and honestly mean it in the book. If you're inclined to create, put the book down, just go do it. And I think
yeah.
what that often means is you're actually like everyone's putting one foot in front of the other. And the reality is that if they looked back or up, they'd realize that they could take a big leap. And
hmm
that is like really the difference between someone who's understanding how to build their brand or build their campaign or whatever it is they're looking to achieve, and someone who's just going to continue to do the work day in and day out and never make a leap.
Yeah. Well, to that point, I loved that part of the book that said, like, it honestly, if you're just reading this book to procrastinate and you know what you need to do, close the book and do it. I think that is great advice to anyone listening to this podcast. You have the information you need. Now go ahead and do it. So I think we will stop the podcast there. Thank you so much for joining, Ted. We will continue our film discussion offline.
Sounds good. And that campaign.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. Talk soon. Thanks, Ted.
Thanks, TJ. Bye.